The Indochina Wars had ended. At least, that is what was written in the agreements and on the pages of history. But if the wars had truly ended, why could a Laotian farmer still be killed by a bomb buried beneath his field before he was even born? Why have so many families across Indochina still been unable to bring the war inside their own homes to a close? On the 21st of July, 1954, the Geneva Conference brought the First Indochina War to an end. On the 27th of January, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed with the promise of ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam. On the 30th of April, 1975, the government of the Republic of Vietnam surrendered, paving the way for the reunification of the country. 3 moments described as endings, yet each time the gunfire fell silent, another war began. The war of those who had lost their homeland, those who returned only to find that they no longer recognized their former homes, soldiers who survived but continued to carry the battlefield into their sleep, and children born after peace who still grew up beside the remnants of bombs and shells. Perhaps war does not disappear. It merely leaves the trenches to lie beneath the earth, enter the human body, hide within memory, and pass from one generation to the next. So on what date did the Indochina Wars truly end? Or even today, are we still merely living through their aftermath? On the map, Indochina is merely a stretch of land connecting Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. But in the history of the 20th century, it once resembled a vast house through which war moved from one room to another. Just as the flames began to subside in one place, the smoke of battle had already begun spreading into another land. On the 2nd of September, 1945, at Ba Dinh Square, President Ho Chi Minh read the Declaration of Independence, proclaiming the birth of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. More than a year later, on the night of the 19th of December, 1946, the nationwide resistance war against French colonial rule broke out. After nearly 8 years from the beginning of the nationwide resistance, the war reached its decisive turning point with the victory at Dien Bien Phu on the 7th of May, 1954. A colonial empire was forced to retreat, but the peace that had just emerged already carried within it the beginnings of a new division. From the mid-1950s until 1975, the war was no longer confined to Vietnamese territory. Laos was drawn into a civil war intertwined with covert operations and confrontation among the great powers. Cambodia attempted to preserve its neutrality, but ultimately became a battlefield before descending into civil war and the catastrophe of the Khmer Rouge. By the time the old political orders in all 3 countries came to an end, one after another, in 1975, the people of Indochina had still not been given the chance to enter an era of stability. Conflict continued to erupt along Vietnam's southwestern border, within Cambodian territory, and across Vietnam's northern frontier. After 1975, tensions that had previously been obscured by war began to surface. On the 26th of September, 1989, Vietnam announced the completion of its final troop withdrawal from Cambodia. Therefore, the Vietnam War, the Resistance War against the United States, and the Second Indochina War are not merely different names for the same historical event. Each name casts light upon one part of history, but it may also leave other battlefields, other communities, and other forms of suffering submerged in darkness. There were people born as the colonial order was collapsing, who came of age amid bombs and gunfire, and became parents just as former allies began turning against one another. For them, war was not a brief chapter in a history book. It covered almost the entirety of a human life. When a war is named after one country, are the fates of the other countries unintentionally pushed beyond the boundaries of memory? To understand why Indochina was drawn into so many layers of conflict, we must return to the summer of 1954, when a demarcation line described as temporary opened the way to 2 opposing futures. In the summer of 1954, in Geneva, diplomats sat around maps, searching for a way to end the war. But beyond the conference rooms, millions of people were about to learn how to live with a division that no one knew how long would last. The agreement on the cessation of hostilities in Vietnam was signed on the 20th of July that year. The People's Army of Vietnam regrouped to the north. The forces of the French Union regrouped to the south of a provisional military demarcation line near the 17th parallel and running along the Benhai River. The document emphasized that this was neither a political nor a territorial boundary. Within a maximum period of 300 days, the armed forces of both sides were required to complete their regroupment. Civilians wishing to move to the zone assigned to the other side were to be permitted and assisted in doing so. On the ships and along the roads stretching across Vietnam, that choice was never an easy one. Hundreds of thousands of people left the north for the south. Many officials, soldiers, and their families regrouped from the south to the north. Some left because of faith, ideals, concerns for safety, or fear. Some believed they would be away from their homeland for only 2 years and would return after a nationwide general election. They could not have known that many of the farewells exchanged that summer would last for more than half a lifetime. The final declaration of the Geneva Conference, dated the 21st of July, envisaged nationwide elections to reunify Vietnam in July 1956. Yet the parties did not leave the conference with the same understanding. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam regarded the general election as the path for continuing the process of reunification. The state of Vietnam opposed the partition and did not accept those political provisions. The United States did not become a signatory, but instead issued a separate declaration stating that it would refrain from using force to disrupt the agreements and would support reunification through free elections supervised by the United Nations. The nationwide general election never took place. The demarcation line, described as temporary, gradually became the boundary between two governments, two armies, and two narratives of the same country. As children on both sides grew up beneath different flags, could a boundary still remain merely temporary? While Vietnam remained divided between the two banks of the Benhai River, the flames of war had already begun following the mountain roads into Laos and Cambodia, battlefields often obscured behind the name the Vietnam War. In Laos, the war did not begin with a declaration addressed to the entire nation. It crept along mountain roads, through the eastern forests and the valleys, where the planting seasons were gradually replaced by the sound of aircraft. On the 23rd of July, 1962, the Declaration on the Neutrality of Laos was signed in Geneva. The Declaration of Neutrality was signed after a coalition government under Prime Minister Suvarnabhumi had been formed, in the hope of keeping Laos outside the confrontation among the great powers. On paper, Laos was given the opportunity to remain outside the confrontation. On the ground, however, the country's location turned it into a strategic corridor that no side was willing to abandon. Along eastern Laos, North Vietnam's supply route toward the battlefields in the south continued to expand. The Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese forces confronted the Royal Lao Army and forces supported by the United States. The United States Central Intelligence Agency operated a major paramilitary campaign, recruiting many Hmong people to fight. In the skies came waves of airstrikes. On the ground, villages were trapped between opposing armies. International pledges of neutrality were not enough to protect the people of Laos. Cambodia also attempted to maintain a delicate balance under head of state Norodom Sihanouk. However, the eastern part of the country was increasingly used as a base and corridor by North Vietnamese forces and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam. On the 18th of March, 1969, the administration of President Richard Nixon began a secret bombing campaign in Cambodia. Exactly 1 year later, the Cambodian National Assembly removed Sihanouk from power while he was abroad, paving the way for the Lon Nol government. In late April that year, the armed forces of the Republic of Vietnam launched offensives into Cambodia. On the evening of the 30th of April, President Richard Nixon announced the expansion of the campaign, and United States forces began crossing the border. A country that had once tried to remain outside the war was now drawn directly into civil war. Within that vacuum, the Khmer Rouge grew stronger. On the 17th of April, 1975, its forces entered Phnom Penh. The people believed the war was over, but only hours later, the entire city was ordered to evacuate. Some moments bear the appearance of peace before people have time to realize that they are merely doors opening onto another catastrophe. Can a nation truly remain neutral when its territory lies across the lifeline of larger armies? By the spring of 1975, as the old governments collapsed one after another across Indochina, each nation entered the day its war ended with an entirely different state of mind. At noon on the 30th of April, 1975, President Duong Van Minh announced his surrender. Military columns entered Saigon, and the flag of the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam was raised over Independence Palace. The war that had lasted for decades on Vietnamese soil came to an end. On many streets, people emerged with the joy of seeing a country no longer divided between two governments and two armies. The soldiers who had passed through mountains, forests, and bombardments understood that they were living through a moment that so many of their comrades had not survived to witness. For them, that day was the outcome of a journey toward independence and reunification, paid for with youth, blood, and long years away from home. In another part of the city, families hurriedly packed a few sets of clothes, personal documents, and whatever keepsakes they could carry. The final flights, ships leaving the ports, and helicopters rising amid the chaos carried many people away from their homeland. Not everyone knew where they were going. They understood only that a political regime had just collapsed, while the life ahead had become a blank page. After the war ended, Vietnam began the process of unifying its state apparatus and reorganizing its economic and social life. On the 2nd of July, 1976, the Sixth National Assembly decided that the country's official name would be the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. The country was unified as a state, but healing the divisions that had developed over more than 20 years of separation proved far more difficult than erasing a boundary from a map. Many military personnel, civil servants, and people who had worked for the government of the Republic of Vietnam were ordered to report for re-education. Some returned after a short period. Others were held for many years. The transformation of private commerce and industry, the centrally managed economic system, and programs that relocated people to new economic zones profoundly altered the lives of millions of families. Amid economic devastation, increasingly tense regional relations, and a future filled with uncertainty, growing numbers of people sought ways to leave Vietnam. From the first years after 1975, people had already begun seeking ways to leave Vietnam by sea. By 1978 and 1979, that exodus surged dramatically, turning the South China Sea into one of the most dangerous refugee routes of the post-war era. Among them were former soldiers, civil servants, civilians, ethnic Chinese, and children who never fully understood why their families had to leave. Many reached temporary refugee camps in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, or Hong Kong. Others disappeared at sea because of storms, hunger, damaged vessels, or pirates, leaving behind no grave. The crisis did not end with the Vietnamese. Laotians, Hmong people, and Cambodians also left their homelands overland, crossed the Mekong River, or sought refuge in camps along the Thai border. They carried different reasons with them, but shared the same sorrow. Their homeland still existed, yet the road home was no longer what it had once been. The year 1975, therefore, cannot be remembered through a single emotion alone. Within the same historical moment, the joy of reunification, the pain of defeat, and the bewilderment of ordinary people existed side by side. Can a nation remember the past together without forcing one person's pain to deny another person's joy? While tens of thousands of families were seeking ways to leave Indochina, the first attacks along Vietnam's southwestern border were already signaling that the long-awaited peace was about to give way to another war. After April 1975, Cambodia was transformed into a closed society under the rule of the Khmer Rouge. Currency, markets, religion, and many former institutions were abolished. The population was forced into collective labor units, living amid hunger, coercion, and the fear of being branded an enemy. The purges targeted not only intellectuals, officials, and ethnic groups, but also turned inward against members of the regime itself. A country that had just emerged from civil war entered a period in which, at times, a single suspicion was enough to make an entire family disappear. Relations between democratic Kampuchea and Vietnam also rapidly descended into confrontation. During 1977 and 1978, Khmer Rouge forces repeatedly crossed the border and killed civilians in Vietnam's southwestern provinces. On the 3rd of November, 1978, Vietnam and the Soviet Union signed the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation. Less than 2 months later, on the 25th of December, the Vietnamese military launched a large-scale offensive into Cambodia. On the 7th of January, 1979, Vietnamese forces, together with Cambodian forces opposed to the Khmer Rouge, entered Phnom Penh, ending the Pol Pot regime's control of the capital. For many survivors, it was the day the doors of a vast prison were opened. For many other governments, Vietnam's prolonged military presence was viewed as intervention and occupation. Both interpretations existed side by side because a single event could free people from a brutal regime while also opening a new geopolitical confrontation. At that time, China supported the Khmer Rouge and was engaged in an intense confrontation with the Soviet Union. During his visit to the United States from the 28th of January to the 5th of February, 1979, Deng Xiaoping spoke directly with President Jimmy Carter about his intention to carry out a limited military action against Vietnam. On the 17th of February, Chinese forces advanced simultaneously across Vietnam's northern border. The large-scale offensive lasted only a few weeks, but tensions, artillery exchanges, and clashes along the border continued for many years. Soldiers who had only just returned from the former battlefield once again shouldered their packs and set out. Families that had just welcomed home one surviving son now had to send another son to the frontier. When the common enemy disappeared, nationalism, territorial disputes, and the Sino-Soviet split tore apart alliances that had once been regarded as enduring. Do alliances forged by war often begin to collapse as soon as there is no longer a common enemy? Armies may eventually leave the battlefield, but beneath the fields and within the human body, another part of war remains behind in silence. In a field in Laos, a farmer may see that the land has turned green again without knowing that beneath the grass lies a small object no larger than an orange. Local people call them by a simple name, bombies, cluster bomblets. Over 9 years, from 1964 to 1973, more than 270 million cluster bomblets were dropped on the country. An estimated 80 million of them failed to explode. They lie in rice fields, beside streams, near schools, and beneath the roads leading into villages. Some remain silent for decades, then explode when struck by a hoe, when a child picks one up believing it to be a toy, or when a poor person tries to dismantle it and sell the metal. Here, war does not return with the sound of aircraft engines. It returns from the very soil that people must cultivate in order to survive. Vietnam carries a similar legacy. According to the results of a nationwide survey published by the Vietnam National Mine Action Center, based on data compiled through the end of 2014, nearly 6,100,000 hectares of land had been identified as contaminated or suspected of being contaminated by mines and unexploded ordnance, equivalent to 18.71% of the country's total area. Behind that figure are lands that still cannot be cultivated safely, construction projects that require explosive ordnance clearance before work can begin, and families that have lost loved ones long after peace arrived. Another remnant lies not in metal, but in the soil, the mud, and the human body. The United States military used Agent Orange and other tactical herbicides during the war. Agent Orange, in particular, was contaminated during production with TCDD, a highly toxic form of dioxin. Decades later, high concentrations of dioxin continue to be detected at locations where the chemicals had once been stored and handled, especially around former air bases such as Da Nang and Bien Hoa. For United States veterans who were exposed, the country's Department of Veterans Affairs recognizes numerous cancers and other health conditions as presumptively associated with herbicide exposure. In Vietnam, the story is even more painful, as many families see illness, disability, and abnormalities persist across generations and wonder how deeply the war has entered their bloodlines. Science must continue to distinguish between what has been proven, what is supported by suggestive evidence, and what cannot yet be concluded. The anxiety of these families, however, has existed for a long time. There is another void that cannot be measured in hectares or chemical concentrations: those who left and have never been found. Many Vietnamese families are still waiting for news of their relatives' remains. The United States continues to cooperate with Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in the search for missing service members. Joint excavations, in which each layer of soil is sifted by hand, have become one of the first humanitarian bridges between former enemies. For reconciliation sometimes begins not with a grand treaty. It begins by returning to a mother, a wife, or a child, the name and remains of the person they lost. Is a child born decades after the bombing truly living in a post-war era if every step must still be taken with caution against the remnants of war? Yet that legacy does not weigh upon Indochina alone. On the other side of the Pacific, the war also left a deep fracture within American society, changing the way a great power viewed its own exercise of power. After 1975, the United States did not merely welcome home the soldiers who had survived. The war also brought home a painful question: what happens when a government possesses immense power but gradually loses the trust of its own citizens? In 1971, part of the Pentagon Papers was published in the press, exposing the gap between the explanations presented to the public and the assessments circulating within the policymaking establishment. Americans realized that the war had been prolonged not only by weapons, but also by secret decisions, mistaken forecasts, and silence. The Vietnam Syndrome later became a term for the reluctance to undertake large-scale, prolonged military interventions without a clear path to an end. On the 7th of November, 1973, the United States Congress overrode President Richard Nixon's veto to enact the War Powers Resolution, intended to strengthen congressional oversight when the president commits armed forces to hostilities. That same year, the United States transitioned to an all-volunteer armed force, bringing to an end the era of military conscription associated with the Vietnam War. These changes could not erase the defeat, but they showed that a democracy had been compelled to reconsider the way it entered wars. For many veterans, returning home did not mean that the battlefield had left them. Some were still startled by a sound, the smell of smoke, or the faces of fallen comrades returning in their dreams. It was not until 1980 that post-traumatic stress disorder was formally recognized as a psychiatric diagnosis. The experiences of Vietnam veterans, together with the voices of many groups that had endured trauma, helped society understand that some wounds cannot be seen, yet may remain with a person for the rest of their life. In Southeast Asia, another path gradually opened. ASEAN was established in Bangkok on the 8th of August, 1967, while the war was still raging. Vietnam joined the organization on the 28th of July, 1995, Laos joined on the 23rd of July, 1997, and Cambodia became a member on the 30th of April, 1999. Nations once separated by battle lines eventually sat together within a framework of regional cooperation. After defeat, will a great power learn to restrain its strength, or merely learn to exercise that strength in a different form? Laws may change, and relations between nations may be rebuilt. Yet behind every official document remains a deeper question. How will people remember that war when each community carries a different memory? Many decades have passed, yet the Indochina wars are still remembered through profoundly different images. In Vietnam, there are cemeteries for fallen soldiers stretching from the mountains to the plains, where rows of headstones stand silently in the wind. In many overseas Vietnamese families, memory resides in an old flag, a photograph of Saigon, or the story of a journey that the storyteller has never described as leaving the homeland forever. In Cambodia, prison cells, killing fields, and the testimonies of survivors remind us that some must be called by their proper names, so that suffering is not buried a second time. On the 13th of November, 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated in Washington. The black granite wall does not present an image of victory. It descends gradually into the earth, bearing the names of those who died or went missing. Upon that dark, reflective surface, those standing before the wall can see their own faces reflected among the names. The living and the dead, the present and the past, suddenly stand together within the same frame. The journey from confrontation to dialogue did not take place in a single day. On the 11th of July, 1995, Vietnam and the United States announced the normalization of diplomatic relations. In August of that same year, the two countries' embassies officially opened in Hanoi and Washington. Behind the diplomatic ceremonies were many years of humanitarian cooperation, information sharing, and gradual efforts to address the consequences of war. Former enemies began working together, not because the past had disappeared, but because they understood that the future could not be built by continuing to live in the posture of war. History is often drawn through borders, arrows marking military advances, and dates printed in bold. Yet behind every line on a map, there is always a home left behind, a mother waiting for her child, and a generation forced to learn how to live with consequences it did not create. At Atlas of the Past, we do not merely trace the borders that have disappeared. We search for the human destinies still trapped behind them. We cannot return to change what happened, but we can choose how we look at the past, refusing to use history to nurture further hatred, and refusing to let the memory of one side erase the losses of the other. If this story causes you to pause, even for a single minute, and think about those who lived, those who died, and those who were swept away by history, please leave a word of remembrance. There is no need to distinguish which side they once stood on, because on the other side of every war, there is always a human being.